we're just coming up now to 1:40 to our afternoon. I hope everybody has had a break and a chance to have a sandwich or a cup of tea or something. Weather here in Sligo is just gorgeous, lovely and sunny, so I hope it's the same wherever you all are. So for this afternoon session, I'm delighted to welcome Shelley Brady, Dr. Shelley Brady, who is our Disability Officer here in IT Sligo. And again, Shelley is one of our members on the UDL working group. And so Shelley is going to chair our theme 5, hard to believe we're on to theme 5 already, adopting alternative assessment practices through a UDL lens. So Shelley, I shall pass over to you.
Thanks, Niamh, and welcome back everybody after lunch. I hope you're all feeling refreshed and ready for this wonderful session with Paul and Lisa. Theme 5, as Niamh said, adopting alternative assessment practices through a UDL lens. So as with the other sessions, I'll let the speakers know when they have 1 minute left. And can I please remind you all to please enter any questions you have into the Q&A function. And please also feel free to keep tweeting using the hashtag UDLITSligo. So I'm delighted to introduce Paul Ferry, who lectures here in IT Sligo with the Department of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering. And he is going to speak to us about his experience with assessment without borders, accessible assessment techniques and evaluation tools. So over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Just checking you can hear me and see my screen okay?
Yeah, everything's perfect.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Okay, hi everyone. Hopefully you're all enjoying the conference today. My name is Paul Ferry. I lecture in the Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering Department here in IT Sligo. And I'm going to talk about my presentation topic is around assessment without borders. We're looking at accessible assessment techniques and some evaluation tools. Okay. So I'm going to start off talking about my UDL journey. Having studied a HDIP and more recently a MALT, I like to have thought I was up to date in good pedagogical practices. However, I've probably become more complacent in applying these pedagogical practices and probably made excuses into why I hadn't followed through in them. When I was made aware of the UDL Digital Badge, I was intrigued to see what was involved, and that's where my journey actually started. I had heard of UDL before, but for some reason I only thought it applied to assessment and alternating the assessment to cater for a wide range of learners, when really it opened my eyes in terms of the entirety of what can be applied and who can benefit from it through the available guidelines. So for me, it was about that accessibility to all students. Reflecting on my teaching approaches and reviewing student feedback across numerous modules, I knew there were many areas that could be improved on. And like any intervention, I thought it would be best to start with just a small change. In line with the UDL guidelines, I wanted to serve the needs of all learners. And I based my intervention on a design-based module within the mechanical engineering program. The main assessment element of this module is the design and development of an engineering artifact, which is specified within the main project brief, a snapshot we'll see before you. Other assessments of the module were in the form of project updates, a report, generation of a 3D CAD model, and a presentation. Now, the student feedback did highlight some issues with the project brief in this module, and the main element that stuck in my mind was the issue that the international students had in their interpretation of the brief. Other students also commented on the terminology used, and some in terms of the lack of clarity that was within the brief. As such, I could see that the brief wasn't fully accessible to all learners in the module, and there were borders preventing this accessibility to the main assessment element of the module. The UDL guidelines helped to guide me in possible directions to take, and in that process, I realized that other assessment elements and teaching approaches could be adopted along the way, removing the borders that were restricting access to all students. On a positive note, I recognized aspects of my teaching that were aligned with these guidelines along the lines of multiple means of representation and engagement. So for me, removing those border walls, we are making assessment accessible to all students. The original brief, and like many briefs, in my opinion, it was stagnant. It was almost lifeless, and in this case, it lacked clarity. I decided to try and brief some form of life into it, and that much needed clarity and alternate the display of information to try and make it accessible to all the students. This was done in the form of demonstration videos of all the important aspects of the brief. Links to these videos were added or embedded into the brief, offering ways for the student to access how they perceive the required information and help to clarify the terminology associated within the brief. Okay, so within this there would be just a series of short videos. For example, in this one here, it was around the mechanism of the required motions required. So if I was to play this, is going to lift up, okay, a distance of 25 millimeters. Okay, so this is the motions required. And then another video here, again, this is just a snapshot from the overall brief, would explain to the students then how the CAM assembly station that they would be designing would fit into the existing machine skeleton. So as we can see, the information within the brief then is alternated in terms of still being able to read the text, okay, which was simplified in terms of the terminology, etc., and also being able to use that audio and visual options through those videos. In terms of evaluation tools from a teacher and the student's perspective, I also changed the format of the project updates. These were originally in the form of a written report, you can see here only, which would highlight the progress that the student had made to date. To enhance the capacity for monitoring progress and optimize individual choice and autonomy, the students were allowed to choose what format they would submit their project updates in, which helped support their performance. The choices were given were in the form of the written reports again, a storyboards, or a recording of them presenting their progress using a design media of their choice, such as Screencast-O-Matic, PowerPoint screen recorder, Bandicam, and many other options. So for example, this would be one clip of a student to use Screencast-O-Matic to record the progress that they'd made, and again, being able to demonstrate in an audio and a visual perspective then.
So this is a roller and there is a pin attached to that.
In terms of the progress that he would communicate in the progress that he would have made over the last week or 2 weeks. Interesting enough, in relation to these screencast type recordings, students began using these methods to communicate and ask questions outside of the class time, which further enhanced possible evaluations of progress in the remote learning environment that they were in at that stage. Group tutorial sessions were also enhanced with a range of resources to allow the students to manipulate and visualize components that would be used in such an artifact. Simple things such as visualizing the size of a screw, looking at the internal operation of a linear bearing, and how a flange bearing has self-aligning capabilities, provided a form of scaffolding for the students. So as such, these tutorials helped construct a community of learning in which all were engaged in common interests or activities. In terms of conclusion, yeah, it was a successful outcome for the students and for the lecturer. And in my perspective, it was a very rewarding experience. As what I deemed at the live project brief, it was seen the students did comment on how it was a significant improvement and the information was presented in a much clearer fashion. They commented on how they liked the autonomy they were given in the project updates and the presentation formats. Students also spoke about how the physical materials that were made available in the tutorials and how it helped them visualize what components they may incorporate into their designs.
1 minute.
Thank you, Shelley. Like any intervention, time and effort was required. Okay? It took a lot of hours to kind of figure out and get it done, but the outcome made it all worthwhile. You can see the work that was presented, how pleased the students were with the different format that was presented among them. So incorporating some of the UDL principles has not only enhanced the learning environment, it also instilled a desire for me and for the students to think outside of the box and bring new, important and enlightening approaches into my modules. Okay, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'll take any questions that might be there.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed it. And I think your use of student feedback of the barriers of the brief and how that had a knock-on effect for you in your teaching. And I love the analogy of the kind of breaking down those border walls, and the live project brief was absolutely fabulous, really was.
Thank you.
So kind of, you can see that you are a really well-qualified guy, and you alluded to that, and you have your master's in learning, teaching and assessment, but you spoke about the UDL Digital Badge. And is this something that you would recommend to your colleagues?
Oh, 100%, yes. Like, I mean, I did comment on how I thought I was in the know in terms of what UDL was about, but again, it was just in my head, it was assessment, but it was only then when I took part in the digital badge that I realized it says like how much was involved, like how I wasn't reaching out to the students and all of the different tools or guidelines that are available for me to be able to reach out to them all, not just your regular students, but those of all those different learning difficulties. And even in terms of the timing of it too, we're in that remote environment. So working within the group, I know I had another colleague within the engineering department in our group, but 2 other colleagues, and it was a great dynamic that I was feeding off them, they were feeding off me. And even in terms of my interventions, they had some important comments and feedback in terms of maybe, did I undertake too much in terms of a workload, and how maybe moving on from this then, little other things we could change. So in terms of that dynamic also, we're all at home and there was no coffee breaks where we can sit down with colleagues. So for me, that was an important aspect of it. But overall, yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile experience. And I would be advising not just colleagues, for those all listening, to look into it. Don't be scared by it. As I said, I just took a simplistic approach. It worked out. It's not to say that I won't be revisiting that module again. There's always areas for improvement. Just
fantastic. And I know you said that you made some small changes, but those changes had an absolutely huge effect for your students. Have you implemented any UDL approach in any of your other modules as a result of?
Yeah, I would have, and a few other things I didn't comment on there, even in terms of the module layouts and the Moodle page. So I was introduced, again, that's the power of our team in IT Sligo then, even the simple things like the use of tiles in the Moodle page, where I was able to chunk that information into smaller segments in terms of information, and I would have a heading on those tiles and also an image too in terms of what's involved. So I would have done that for all of my modules. And then there would have been another module too. It was manufacturing, engineering, technology, where normally the students will come in and they're working in an engineering workshop environment, and they're given a set of working drawings, and okay, they have to make the part according to specifications. But I tried then in terms of, I give them a choice of 2 different exercises. One in which they had the working drawings and off they went. Or the other option is that they could design an engineering clamp, and where they would have to design it, produce their working drawings, and then manufacture the part. So, and interesting enough, all of the students went for the second option, and allowed them to be more creative. So just little aspects like that is what I've been trying to implement too. Just
there's loads of really positive comments coming through the chat here, but we have time for one maybe other quick question.
Yep.
And that is, were the students reluctant or reticent to make videos or use their own voice?
Yeah, there was. That's a good question. There was some, but they knew what was coming up on a module, and I would have said in terms of other assessment, there was a report and there was going to be a presentation. So I did, for those that I knew were more shy in nature, this was their opportunity they're in their own environments in front of the computer. So it's still their own choice, but I did encourage them to say, well, make use of both of them, the written reports or the presentations. And one student did comment on how he knew there was a report to be done, and his updates were done in the form of a written report so that he could use that information when it came to his end reports. So some were reluctant, but they got over that hurdle then, which was good to see. Just
brilliant. Listen, Paul, thank you so much again. That was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Shelley.
I'd like to now move on to introduce Lisa Cronin. So Lisa is a lecturer in the Water and Wastewater Science at IT Sligo, and she lectures across several programs in the Department of Environmental Science and the Department of Civil Engineering and Construction. She has over 20 years working in the water services sector in Ireland, and today she is going to talk to us about her experience in adapting to COVID-19, incorporating universal design into a first year assessment. So I'd just like to hand over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Shelley. I think it's actually sharing the wrong screen for me here at the moment, I think. Just give me 1 minute. I'm having.
I can share the slides from here, Lisa, and you can tell me when to move on if that's helpful.
No, it should come up now. Has it sharing? It should be sharing the right screen for you now. Can you see that first screen there, Shelley?
Not yet, no.
Oh, it's telling me that it is. Sorry now about this. We will
Okay,
share
I can share from
screen.
here, Lisa, and you can tell me when to move on. Is that okay? Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Has it come up? Great.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah, super. Thanks very much for that, and good evening to everybody. Yes, as Shelley said, I lecture here in water and wastewater science, and I lecture across the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering. So in terms of the challenge then for COVID-19, I was already delivering online modules to part-time students in the evenings, but I certainly found that adapting modules for full-time students was a totally different animal altogether. So I had concerns around, how was I around content, engagement, student experience. So how was I going to adapt the content for online delivery? How was I going to connect with the full-time students? How do I know whether they're engaged or not? A lot of times they've no cameras on, there's no message in the chat room. Has everybody gone to make a cup of tea, and is it just me here? And also then, how can I provide some level of student experience to those students who never signed up for an online course? So I had concerns around understanding. Do they understand the content? How will I know that they're actually understanding the content? How best should I bridge the theory and the application in an online setting? Can I provide opportunities for the students to network and get to know some of their peers? And also then, how will I manage teamwork in an online setting? Looking then at the modules for redesign, and I suppose when I had signed up for the UDL badge, in my wisdom, I had an interest in accessibility, but I'd expected the COVID-19 pandemic would be done and dusted by, September, October of 2021. So my initial reaction, I suppose, to the redesign was what possessed me to sign up for this at this time. And from there, then I moved on to, well, how can I use UDL to help me in this current scenario that neither I nor the students chose to be in. So the module that I chose for the UDL redesign was Chemistry and Chemical Hazards. It's a first-year module for occupational safety and health students. And what I had found previously, I had delivered it the previous year, was that students really didn't understand why they were doing. They were not purposeful, motivated learners. There wasn't a huge pile of interest in it or in motivation for learning. There's an inquiry-based learning module that runs alongside this module, but there was really very poor integration between the theoretical module and the EBL module. And there was a perception among the students that chemistry is very, very difficult and that they're not going to be able to do it. So the aim of the redesign then was threefold. I needed to get the students to engage with the fundamental theory. So I needed to deliver this content and they needed to take it in. I wanted to provide a flexible, inclusive assessment structure because the previous, the previous design of the assessment was not inclusive and it was not very flexible at all. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, I wanted to provide an opportunity for collaboration, to the students as well. So looking at the different areas then for UDL and looking at multiple means of engagement, I organised short group activities via channels on Microsoft Teams. And previously students had worked on the exercises associated with each of the topics at home after lectures. So this gave them an opportunity to work on activities together. They would work together on Teams, they would put their results on whiteboards, and they reacted really positively to this, that many of them felt quite isolated due to the COVID-19 restrictions. There was videos and other resources provided on Moodle as per usual. And I also had self-assessment tool available on Moodle, a digital one, which I haven't done previously. Looking then at multiple means of representation, multiple means of, sorry, now that's gone a bit funny there, sorry. So Looking then at multiple means of representation, the EBL module runs concurrently. So I needed to front load some of the information in the theory module, so it was available when the students needed it in the EBL module. I had to do some work around context for the chemical theories, so why should they care about this theory? Why was this theory important? I did that via case studies so that they could see the relevance for health and safety. There was lots of exothermic reactions so they could see the implications of some of these problems. And the UDL course really highlighted to me the importance of building on their existing knowledge. So I started with the chemistry of fire, as it's a concept that they were all familiar with as a starting point. Looking then at multiple means of expression, I took a collaborative approach to the redesign, and I polled the students. Did they want to work in groups? Did they want to work individually? 100% of them that were polled said they wanted to work in groups. So I created groups on Teams and a collaborative space using class notebooks so students could share ideas with their own team, and they could actively work in real time on the assignment templates in Microsoft Teams. So there was brainstorming, learning gaps and action plan templates. They had a choice of 10 topics, and then there was 4 options of media types for submission. There was a timeline then for the assignment, as you can see displayed here. And I suppose the important thing to note on that is that in week 2, a student can opt out of the group and complete a modified assessment. A couple of the students did decide to do this, and then I hastily pulled together some adjusted marking rubrics for this. One of the advantages of the templates that I found was that I didn't just receive a final submission, but I could see how they went about it, and I could see, intercept any problems that might be arising as they were doing it. Looking then at multiple means of action and expression, the submissions were shared as a resource. So it actually went up on the Moodle page, and I felt that this would help students to engage if everyone's going to be looking at it. The reflection logs gave me a really good insight into what students thought of the assignment and their experience of the group activity. And I also wanted to build on the skills that they'd learned in their assignment and transfer these to planning for the final assessment. So we did an interactive workshop on planning for the final assessment, and they set themselves their own goals of preparing their individual study plans. What have I learned from this UDL? Focusing on how the students learn gives much better engagement, improves my teaching practice, and provides a much more enjoyable experience for everybody. And for somebody who's only in the Institute a couple of years, that was really a great insight for me.
1 minute.
I also, I suppose I also understood the importance of stimulating interest and creating a positive learning environment, particularly in topics that students are not typically interested in. So there was options for both learning and expression, and certainly the peer engagement enhances motivation and deeper learning. So the feedback then from the students was really, really positive. And I suppose the 2 standout points for me on it was that chemistry and fun could be uttered in 1 sentence, and that because the student found it easier to understand, they could actually enjoy the module. So I'm going to leave you on 2 insights from industry. One is the continuous improvement cycle, and the other is a quotation from Ginny Rometty, who was the first woman to head up IBM. And it's, of course, that growth and comfort do not coexist. And for me, in terms of COVID-19 and the UDL redesign, I was out of my comfort zone a lot. But I certainly found the experience very worthwhile, especially for someone like me who doesn't have a strong background in teaching, like Paul and many others of my colleagues. I'll certainly be delighted to leave behind some of the COVID adaptations, including talking to full-time students via screen. But what remains, I will certainly integrate into how I deliver on campus, and I look forward to continuing to improve and learn, both from designing for UDL, but also from feedback from my students.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you very much.
That was fantastic. And the thought and care that you always put into ensuring that you engage with your students positively, always at the forefront of your teaching, and that really is evident in the feedback there when you captured the student voice. So thank you so much. And there's just a few questions here. Was it a lot of extra work to redesign the assessment?
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly work involved in it. And I suppose one of the things that I found interesting was, I gave them, a number of different options. I designed the rubrics. Then, two of the students had decided to go individually, which I had designed into it, but I hadn't really modified the rubrics very well around that. So there was more work around it, yes. But I took those rubrics and I applied them to other modules. So it was much less work on the next module that I applied it to, and the module after that. They were kind of sitting there like templates out there for me. But yeah, there was more work involved in it. Yeah, and I mean, I certainly thought, what am I doing this for at this moment in time? Am I mad?
I know.
But it was, it certainly was really worthwhile. And to be honest, when it came to correcting, then it was so much easier because the rubrics were really detailed. They were really set out. And the students took on board the feedback really, really well, because they could see from the rubric that they didn't match, or they did match what was outlined and what was required. There was certainly more work involved in it, but it's the initial work, and it sets it up for all the other modules where that you follow on from it.
That's fantastic. Another question, were there any unexpected benefits or drawbacks that you experienced during this process?
I suppose one thing that I did find unexpected was I gave them multiple means of expression, and they all bar one group chose PowerPoint presentations. I was just amazed. I was like, seriously, look at all the lovely rubrics I've designed. Would somebody not like to use one of the other? So that I was surprised about. I suppose I was really surprised around the fact how they encouraged each other to learn. That was one of the things that was unexpected. So on channels, on Teams, you can drop in. So I had set it up on those weekly lectures where they could do activities, and you drop in, and sometimes they're just having a chat, which happened much later. And at the start, you'd have one person who'd be doing the activity, and the others, it was kind of like a safe space in which to do it. And that I found, unexpected in a way, the way they encouraged each other. Oh, try this, and will we try it that way? And is that how you do it? And, the level of engagement was so much better. I had tried it on the classroom previously, but I think when everybody's looking at the one person trying to do something, that didn't work as well at all. As, they felt it was much more private on Teams, and I was quite surprised about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Lisa, you're getting loads of really positive feedback here in the chat. Brian Mulligan has said continuous improvement beats excellence by design, which I think is really true. I think we have time for another question. So have you any key pieces of advice for someone who is thinking of incorporating UDL into an assessment?
Yeah, go first would be the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say, and I would reiterate what Paul said, if you get an opportunity to do the badge, do it, because I learned as much from the people in my peer group as I did from all the wonderful UDL resources that are provided from ahead. And particularly for somebody like me who's new to teaching, they would say, I tried that, it didn't work great, and it didn't work great because I didn't set it up right, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. So I would say to people, go for it. Get advice from whoever will give it to you. And if you can, and if you do have the opportunity to do the badge, then I would say, go for it. The work in terms of the redesign, there was a certain amount of work associated with that. But that was really the work that was required for the badge. There was nothing extra around that. So when you did the redesign, you kind of had the badge done. So that's what I would say to people. There's a multiple benefit to it, and certainly for me, it was kind of a module I was dreading online, and it turned out to be one of the better ones in many ways this year.
Yeah, and like you say, once you've done that redesign, once you have it there as a template,
you have it there
going forward. And I suppose to just mention what I know you experienced and Paul experienced, that those peer groups are invaluable for going back and talking to and bouncing ideas off.
Yeah.
And I think UDL ultimately makes you think in a more open-minded, you're more receptive to feedback, you're more inclusive, you're more flexible, not just where our students are concerned, but also where our peers are concerned and our colleagues are concerned. So listen, Lisa and Paul, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for making that such an interesting session. And it really highlights how UDL can be applied to such diverse topics successfully with such positive outcomes for students. So thank you so much.
Thanks very
Thank you,
much,
Shelley.
Shelley.
Thank
Well
you.
done, Lisa.
And
Take
I'd
care.
like to hand over to Dr. Niamh Plunkett now, please. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks very much for that, Shelley. If I just put up my screen here. I'm sure both of our next guest speakers are very familiar with most of you, as their names are synonymous with UDL. Dr. Lisa Padden and Trevor Boland are, I think, truly drivers of UDL and are so supportive of all institutes' efforts across Ireland. And they've certainly been a huge support to ourselves here at IT Sligo and across the CUA. But just to introduce them to you, Lisa has worked in UCD since 2012. And her current role is as project lead for UCD's University for All initiative, based in UCD Access and Lifelong Learning. University for All is UCD's whole institution approach to student inclusion, encompassing strategy and policy, teaching, learning and assessment, student supports and services, the built environment and technological infrastructure. Lisa's research interests include UDL, widening participation, equitable access to education and student inclusion. Trevor is the Digital and E-Learning Officer in AHEAD and has worked for almost 20 years in education. He joined the AHEAD family a year ago, and in that time he has been part of the national UDL Badge Rollout in 2020. He has brought his knowledge from his previous role of Assistive Technology Officer that has informed the AT resource in AHEAD called AT Hive that advocates for more AT awareness in education and employment. In AHEAD, he delivers assistive technology workshops, he supports the positive message of UDL and how it addresses issues of inclusion, as well as promotes accessibility awareness. Both Lisa and Trevor will now present Less Snakes and More Ladders, Please, Barriers and Enablers to Create a UDL Ripple. Again, just to remind people to please pop any questions in the Q&A box. And I'm now going to hand you over to Lisa and Trevor. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Niamh. It was a great introduction. So as Niamh said, we're going to present Less Snakes and More Ladders, Please. Trevor and I love a theme and we really went with this. If you move on to the next slide for me, Trevor. Perfect. So talk about the UDL badge, which you've heard a lot about already today, and it's great to hear everybody's experiences of doing the badge and the peer groups and all of the elements. It's been fantastic. So we're going to talk about the badge, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the National Forum independent evaluation which took place for the national rollout last year. We're going to talk about the redesigns, and you've heard loads of the different redesigns that people have done here already. And we're going to think about what the potential barriers and enablers are for UDL. And you're going to learn about the next national rollout as well at the end of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Trevor to tell you about what the UDL badge is and give you a few more of the specifics.
Hi, thanks a lot, Lisa. So yeah, we're both really excited to share this information. We're going to be rolling out the badge again. So if you are new to UDL, and I have a feeling I might be preaching to the converted here, but if you are new to even UDL and even the UDL badge, this is a 10-week online course designed in partnership with ourselves, AHEAD, and of course the fantastic Lisa Padden in UCD and the National Framework, the National Forum PD framework. So it is available to all who teach and have been kind of have teaching-like aspects within their roles in both further and higher education. So all we ask for people who want to take part in this course is to commit to about 25 hours. And within those 25 hours, you'll learn quite a bit about UDL in a manageable way, also how to implement UDL into an aspect of your course. And as well as this, you have an option to undergo a UDL Facilitator Badge. So you just do a short assignment, it's just a few hours. And then within that, that gives people like the confidence, hopefully, to become UDL badge facilitators themselves. And we make all the resources available that we use within that course. So they're even publicly available, and I can share that link even in the chat, which I'll do in a minute, where you can even download those resources yourself and even apply them to whatever UDL badge you're kind of thinking of rolling out in the future. So for the UDL curious, who do decide to participate in the UDL badge this October, we have videos and written material to explain the course structure itself, as well as its expectations from the outset. And we also have a video about this peer group component within the course. So as you work and communicate with this small group of peers, so those groups of peers are about 5 people. And this peer group is a great way to kind of support each other and share ideas. And also from beginning to end, you'll have this peer group to support you all the way through the course as well. And then there's 3 orientation webinars spread out over the course, and these impart UDL insights and knowledge, information as well about UDL. Within those webinars, we can answer any kind of queries that you have. And sometimes they're just about the UDL assignment itself, or a course about, or a question about the course. And of course, we're there overall to just help you kind of steer you in your UDL path. There will also be 4 group meetings with your peer, and those are kind of spread throughout the course as well. And the last one of which is kind of a peer review kind of system. So those people who you would have worked with, they kind of review in a soft way the UDL reactivity that you do in the end. And throughout, I mean, you know, you'll be sharing and growing your UDL insights as well within that peer group. And then from weeks 5 to 9 of the 10-week-long course, there's an opportunity for you to start implementing then this redesign activity that you've been kind of planning and that you're going to be documenting. And then within those weeks between 5 to 9, you can attend these optional weekly drop-in meetings via Zoom, where you have the opportunity to talk to a peer group facilitator about your redesign activity. And again, just to get kind of any kind of queries and answers about your redesign. Then throughout the course, there are opportunities to reflect on UDL, and then all these interactions and contributions that you would have had throughout all the UDL badge course, those all kind of feed into your UDL redesign activity that enables you to implement some aspect of UDL within your own context in a manageable way. Okay, so Lisa, over to you.
Right. So this new model, I suppose, is different. So the national rollout that we did in 2020 was very different to how we'd rolled out the badge before. So up until that, we had done, obviously people had done local rollouts. We had done a couple of national rollouts, but really it was to a maximum of 40 participants, which was very different to what we did last year. But really the badge works because it's national recognition. So it's part of the National Forum Professional Development Framework. And it really helps to build on the UDL community and develop UDL advocates. The train-the-trainer aspect of the badge, so the Facilitator Badge, which we mentioned, is really important aspect. What we want to make sure is that nobody thinks that UCD or Ahead own UDL or the National Forum own UDL. Everybody owns UDL, and we really want to move UDL out of any one particular unit as well. So a few years ago, UDL was always associated maybe with the disability service or an access service. And what we did with UDL was we want to move it out, make sure that everybody owns it. Every individual person who's involved in teaching and learning is embedding UDL. And it's not just associated with access, or not just a responsibility of an access department. Doing the badge in the way that we have has allowed us to create lots of different examples, and you've heard about the different videos and all the examples today in terms of how UDL can really work to engage students and to level the playing field for students as well. The UDL communities has been a real benefit to the larger rollouts as well. Even through Twitter and social media, and the engagement that we saw last year with the large rollout has been really fantastic, and getting people talking to each other, particularly last year at a time where we were all separate from each other. So actually being able to engage in those conversations and support each other within teaching and learning, or if we came up against a barrier, if we found a snake, that somebody could tell us where the ladder was to avoid it. So the local peer group facilitators and your colleagues here in IT Sligo have been absolutely amazing as facilitators. So without the peer group facilitators, we wouldn't have been able to have the national rollout. There is no way, no matter how many hours there were in the day, that Trevor and I would have been able to facilitate the badge for as many people as last year. But it wasn't even just about the numbers. It was about the engagement that our local facilitators were able to get in local institutions and creating that sense of community where everybody was doing UDL together and on this journey of UDL together. So if you move on to the next slide, Trevor,
Yep.
you can see that in the national rollout, we had 21 local facilitators. And in the end, we had 547 people who were awarded the badge from the rollout last autumn. And 169 of those were also awarded the Facilitator Badge. So now we have a community actually of over 200 facilitators across the country who can facilitate this badge. And just this week, we had a meeting with our facilitators or potential facilitators for the next national rollout. And we're really starting to build momentum and see the development of UDL and people owning UDL in their own context, which is really what we want. And partnership is key to everything that we're doing. So the partnership between UCD and AHEAD, partnership with the National Forum, and more importantly, partnership all across the sector, because we're working together to build this UDL work. So Trevor.
So so the Teaching and Learning Forum very kindly conducted an evaluation of the UDL badge, and these are just a few of the interesting snippets from the evaluation that they carried out. So 82% of the participants, these are the participants of the UDL badge course last year, changed their attitudes to teaching as a result of their engagement with the UDL course. So, and that was changed in a positive way about UDL, just to explain that. And then that in terms of familiarity with UDL, before the course started, 13% of these participants were already familiar with the UDL kind of concept, framework, mindset, and its positive attributes. So the core, and then they went on to explain that the course then reinforced these positive and constructive attitudes and opinions that they had already about UDL. So that was fantastic to see that, you know, the course again was able to just bring that UDL enlightenment. Also, engagement with UDL changed some behaviors to teaching. So in particular, as implementing UDL was easier than some expected. Also, awareness that inclusive learning environments are everyone's business and was a key learning from the course. And then finally, 74% said that their developed knowledge of UDL changed how they taught. And in particular, this was evident within providing options for assessment. So it's fantastic to see so many kind of ladders kind of being climbed then throughout the UDL course. So here we're just going to show a little video about a few UDL badge participants reflecting on their experiences. So it's just a short video, just 3 minutes long. It has real life reactions to the implementation of UDL and was taken from a documentary from a UDL community in a cross-college project around inclusion. And this snippet just has a few of their reactions. So it should play.
Doing the digital badge for Universal Design for Learning, one of the things that really struck me most was the little changes that I made. It didn't just benefit, the students with disabilities. These changes that I made benefited everybody. And I was surprised that I was actually hearing it had the biggest impact maybe on people that I hadn't expected. It's the mature learners returning to education after 20 years. And I suppose the very diverse group of learners that we have, it's learning how to make everybody feel included.
Well, I've noticed in the classroom there is a greater need, much more diversity in the classroom, and I need to be in touch with that as a teacher, but also personally. I've been teaching for a few years now, and I'd like to be involved in something new, something different to freshen up my career, and it's certainly been very positive in that.
Very much hands-on approach. So getting the students to take ownership of their own learning, that was definitely the big thing. And that has empowered them and give them more confidence and, kind of handing it back to them almost, going, this is not just my class, this is your class.
I introduced a video tutorial for students that didn't have the software at home to do their bookkeeping. It was a very simple thing, but I suppose it provided such a support for them in their own pace, and the digital badge for me was fabulous, and it was something that I would look into for other modules next year, just providing support, simple, and I just hadn't done it before.
I've been able to adapt my mindset and look at things differently, look at students differently.
Okay, so just move to the next slide. So over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Trevor. So in terms of the redesign, you've heard actually the previous speakers talking about it. And in our experience, we see a broad range of redesign activities that people take on to do the badge. And actually, the most common query we get at our weekly drop-in is people who, for their redesign, want to do a million different things. And we're usually talking people down and saying, no, focus on one thing, think about your +1 approach. And something that you can implement successfully and measure afterwards. That's what's really important in terms of the badge. And it's really more so with your eyes towards what you're going to do afterwards. But in terms of the redesign, we see lots of people redevelop their materials. So thinking about the multiple means of representation and the content. So to provide additional resources, as you heard about in the video, making sure that there's captions on your videos. So thinking about the accessibility of materials and redevelopment of VLEs. So we see quite a few people who have a look at their virtual learning environment, whether it's Moodle or Blackboard or something else, and restructure it with the student in mind and thinking about, what do students need? When do they need it? How can I make that clearer? How can I make sure that students aren't having to go away and get resources in a million different places and that we have everything together for them? So quite a few as well on student skills development, which is fantastic. Diversity of assessment is always really popular. It's difficult to implement within the time frame of the badge because obviously you're already teaching a module. But looking at, whether you're going to introduce an MCQ, a different type of MCQ, reflective self-assessment, different examples like that. What we'd love to see more of is a focus on the multiple means of engagement. I think people are drawn very much towards representation and action and expression and less so towards engagement. I think sometimes engagement seems a bit more challenging. So we'd love to see more of that in the future redesigns as well. In terms of beyond the badge, would you move to the next slide for me, Trevor?
Yeah.
So what we've noticed is this massive expanded confidence in people in terms of their teaching and learning practice and implementing UDL and thinking about inclusion and creativity. And actually, I think the previous speaker talked about that. Continuing the +1 approach in existing modules. So not getting overwhelmed with, okay, I need to do absolutely everything. I've done my deep self-reflection and I've noticed that I'm doing really well in these areas, but in these other areas, I need to do some work. But you're just building up that. So taking one step at a time up the UDL ladder and increasing that inclusion semester on semester is really important. If you do have an opportunity to design a new module, thinking about UDL from the beginning and not necessarily retrofitting is really useful as well. Choice of assessment, and I thought it was really interesting that Lisa mentioned previously that when she introduced that multiple means of action and expression, that students still all stuck with the PowerPoint. And that's something that we see time and time again, because choice of assessment is something that really works very well when it's introduced on a program level and when students are scaffolded and supported and those new types of assessment aren't as scary to them. Like us all, students are creatures of habit and they will stick to what's familiar to them, even if it's not necessarily the most engaging or the most diverse. So looking at choice of assessment and working with colleagues to build in choice of assessment is great in terms of after the badge and expanding your UDL. And that program approach can be taken not just to diversity of assessment, but also with student skills development and looking at your program with your colleagues and when you're teaching, how you're teaching altogether.
Brilliant. So we're just going to post a little Mentimeter. I know people love Menti. So because it's coming to the end of the year, please endure it just for a little while. So we are just asking people to go to the menti.com website. So open up a new tab on your browser, on your computer or your smartphone, and just type in the website menti.com, and then the code, which I will give to you here. It's on the screen, but if you like a good copy and paste, I'm just going to put it in. So there you go. There's menti.com and there's the code. And we're just going to ask this one question, which is, what are the barriers that you may face when implementing UDL in your own practice? So just take a few moments there, and we're not going to pull up the answer straight away. So there's a slide after this, and then we'll be returning to this question where we'll reveal the results. Okay.
once everybody's gotten the code. So you put
Yeah.
it. So let's have a look at some of these snakes then.
Okay.
The snake Trevor and I hear about all the time. So why can't I implement UDL, or why won't I implement UDL in my practice? What are the barriers? Well, the biggest one is people saying I don't have enough time. So I don't have enough time to redesign what I've got. I already developed my teaching. I have my materials. I'm teaching the same modules. I don't have enough time. I'm spending too much time grading. But really, I suppose the time taken to do the badge is 20 to 25 hours. That includes your redesign. So there really isn't a huge amount of time that you need to put into it within the semester. And if you keep that +1 mentality in mind, it means that you're just incrementally building up the inclusion in your modules. And what I will say is that people who had already implemented UDL, the switch to online teaching was a bit less challenging, still challenging, of course, for everyone. But because of all the way they had the materials developed, the way their VLE was developed, it meant that transition was a bit less difficult. It should also mean that you're spending less time during the semester kind of retrofitting or having to put in alternative options for students who maybe can't access what you have or are having challenges. It should mean as well that there are less students who need reasonable accommodations in your modules. I mean, ultimately UDL, and thinking about the UDL pyramid, we should in our teaching and learning be able to accommodate most students without the need for an additional support. I can't redesign all my teaching. Well, we're not asking you to redesign all your teaching. So it's just thinking about that +1 approach. And the reflection that you do as part of the badge is really, really useful for that, because it allows you to identify where you're doing really well, and nobody's starting from scratch. There's nobody who isn't doing something that's couldn't be considered universal design. So it really allows you to prioritize and say, well, this is what I'm going to work on this semester. Next year, I'm going to work on that. And we're not asking you to redesign all of that teaching. I can't change my assessment, and that's something, Trevor, that we hear all the time.
Yeah, and there tends to be a little bit of flexibility depending wherever you work, whether it's the further education sector or higher education. Yeah, but definitely what I find really positive is, those kind of videos or those kind of people talking today about their own UDL badge implementations, because it really demonstrates that it is possible. Once you kind of are just realistic about the time, and then, as Lisa said, whatever that +1 is that you want to implement, just take it's just a taster, just kind of get a sense out of what it's like. And even one of our peer group facilitators yesterday made a good point that the redesign activity that we ask people, it's a template page, it's got headings, it puts a word count in there. It spells out clearly that we don't look for a huge thesis at the end or a huge kind of redesign kind of submission, that the word count is very tight. So really we are just looking for a small kind of way of kind of seeing and witnessing that implementation level. And it just makes it kind of a more kind of real when you see that the activity isn't kind of a huge daunting task then, what we're looking for in the course.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we called it the redesign activity and not an assignment. And Dara especially hates it when we mention it as an assignment, because it really and it's a template that you fill in. So I don't know enough about UDL in my discipline. So sometimes people get caught up in the fact that there aren't enough examples of UDL in their own very specific discipline. But I mean, the principles of UDL have been really well developed. They are applicable across the board. And if there isn't an example in your discipline, that's a great opportunity for you to create the example in your discipline and work with your colleagues in the discipline as well. Digital skills as well comes up, but UDL doesn't necessarily mean technology. And I think sometimes that's a bit of a myth around UDL, that it all means that everything has to be technology, but it really doesn't. And it's a good opportunity as well for you to take the +1 for yourself in terms of the digital skills as well. So maybe it's Menti, maybe it's making videos. And I think we've all had 12 months of learning rapidly in terms of our digital skills anyway. All right, and I've already had to change so much because of COVID. And I think that's something that's been mentioned earlier as well. There are actually a lot of positives that have come out of COVID, and there are lots of things that maybe we'd like to hold on to. In UCD, for me, that's the fact that we've had no massive exams, no 2,500 students in the RDS, and I hope that remains gone. So we'll see what people said in the Menti, Trevor.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly look over some of them. So time has come up repeatedly. Time or time constraints has happened. And what another feature is time old habits, someone said. So maybe just the fear of just kind of changing kind of habits. But again, that +1 way is just a great way of slowly implementing like new habits into your old habits. Management, I do it already, someone said. That's fantastic. And we find that most people are already kind of doing UDL in some way, a shape or form within their teaching. But the UDL badge course is a great way of kind of illuminating what those components are within your teaching that are already UDL, and then just building on those. Conflicting responsibilities, time, buy-in from other staff. Actually, well, the good thing is like those peer groups of 5 that are going to be within the course, that's an essential group that are going to be supporting you along your journey as well. So there's a minimum of 4 times to meet up with these people, but that can go on for more. Some kind of peer groups actually interact a lot more than that. Don't have the time, framework can be overwhelming. And the framework itself, yeah, definitely can seem a little bit overwhelming, but again, what Lisa said about that +1 approach is really beneficial. And then there's loads of resources out there. YouTube has loads of videos, even about people who talk about it, implement UDL, and there's some fantastic speakers. I mean, Katie Novak is one person who stands out for me. She's like such a pure like educator, and she talks really highly of it. But yeah, those are just some of the snippets there, Lisa.
Great, thanks very much, Trevor. I think Niamh is going to tell us we're running out of time. So do you want to move on to the next?
We shall.
So some of the key enablers, I've mentioned most of these already, so I'm not going to take long. But the professional development piece, so the UDL badge is the kind of easy win here when it comes to your enabler for UDL. It'll give you a really good structured but self-paced way to learn about UDL and then actually implement it in your practice. The top-down support is really important as well. And you know, I think it's very obvious that really the majority of the institutions now in Irish higher and further education are supporting UDL and, you know, really want you to implement UDL. The partnership piece, I don't think I can emphasize enough. So working with other people in your institution, working together, if you come up against a barrier, that you're talking to someone about it and working on the solution together is really important. And looking for the program approach as well. So whether it's a stage in a program or a whole program, and seeing how you can implement UDL in that, and sharing your good practice just like you are here today. And recognition, promotion of your UDL is really important as well. So looking for every opportunity to share with your colleagues and have those discussions. So Trevor's going to tell you about the next rollout.
Brilliant, and that's going to happen very soon. So that, so again, for those UDL curious, we are hosting an information session about the UDL badge next Thursday on June 3rd. So if you are just a little bit interested, come along and we'll just tell you more about it. So there's a web page, and I think I've already shared the web page link in it, but I'll share it again. And you just register for the session. There's a Zoom registration link within that page. So if you just go to the head website, very easy to find on the homepage. And then on June, so there's other kind of dates happening, but the badge itself will be starting on October 4th, as far as I remember. And then there will be an Eventbrite opening in August, and that Eventbrite page will be opening, I have it here with me,
The 23rd of August.
23rd.
Or the 16th of August, because I'm sure you'll have facilitators from IT Sligo, so you'll get your tickets a week beforehand, which is great.
Brilliant. And even that registration is open then until September 21st. So there's plenty of time to register for that. Brilliant stuff. Okay. And I'll just put that link in. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Ray and Trevor. So I think that's us. Anybody has any questions?
Yeah.
Lisa and Trevor, thank you so much for that. I mean, that was just spectacular because it really sets the scene for what we're trying to do today. It doesn't matter where you are in your UDL journey, whether you're in the throes of it, experienced, or you know, wanting to take it on, or to look at your own modules and programs. So it's of huge benefit to everybody. Just a couple of comments that came into the chat box. People are loving the title, Less Snakes and More Ladders, Please. I think that really sums it up. As Anna says, it's so accessible to explain the falling back effect of barriers on life and different aspects of life. Helen, shout out to Helen in TU Dublin there. She says that looking at our modules through a UDL lens encourages design for more inclusivity. And as she says, you know, if you're forced to re-examine your modules, it means teaching, learning, assessment and feedback are enhanced from a pedagogical perspective as well. So it's really good. I suppose, in fact, ourselves here in IT Sligo, we're going to be going through programmatic review in the school, Faculty of Business and Social Sciences. So we've kind of created a specific Moodle page on our UDL site where staff can access. It's literally kind of the first part of the UDL digital badge to give that understanding, and then lots of resources to support staff as they're looking at revalidating their programs and modules. So I think that's something that can be replicated across all HEIs. Just a couple of questions have come in. We have a few minutes. Somebody's just interested in the enablers. Have you any advice for with interacting with key enablers in your own institutes?
Yeah, form a community of practice.
Yeah, community of practice, but also your teaching and learning unit can be a great support. So I think absolutely connecting with them, and it's that partnership piece as well. So making sure you're linking in with if there's kind of learning and development people in your HR department, if you've got a teaching and learning unit or a teaching and learning person that you can link in with, really finding someone that you can collaborate with is important. In terms of I suppose for us in UCD, Universal Design for Learning is part of University for All. So the top-down piece was really important as well. So at a strategy level, so the registrar, our deputy president, is very supportive of our work around inclusion. And a lot of that started with our data. So being able to show how diverse our student population is. So be able to demonstrate the need for UDL can help to get it in there at that kind of strategic level.
And you're right, Lisa, I think that's what's so important. I think that's what's really enabled us in IT Sligo to drive this forward, is that it is actually actioned in our strategic plan. So I think going forward, especially with the national access coming out, you know, I think that's something that all institutes will have to look at. It has to be supported from leadership and from that strategic perspective. Trevor and Lisa, it's now 2:40. Thank you so much for your involvement today and for coming along. Really appreciate it. And we're going to have a coffee break now, and we're going to come back at 3 o'clock to meet with Frederick, who is our guru. I think a lot of people have heard of Frederick or have met him at various conferences, and he always proves to be a very enlightening and a very engaging presentation. So we'll see everybody back in 20 minutes at 3 p.m. Thanks very, very much.